Ottawa took a big step closer today toward awarding compensation to First Nations kids harmed by the child welfare system. It has agreed to certify 2 class action lawsuits, and that means that the feds will enter into mediation to settle the lawsuits, which are both seeking billions of dollars for children taken from their on-reserve homes and put into the welfare system, child welfare system. One of those lawsuits was filed by the Assembly of First Nations. Perry Bellegarde, of course, is the National Chief of the AFN. He joins us now from Ottawa. Hi, National Chief Bellegarde. Good to see you as always.
Good evening, Vashi. Good to be here.
Let me start off just by asking how significant from your vantage point is this?
It's quite significant, having both class action suits certified, and Canada agreeing to mediation as well. It's going to speed up the whole compensation process for the children that suffered abuse and discriminatory practices in a child and family service system that was inadequately funded. And so it's huge. This is positive movement.
Can you explain for our viewers who might not be very familiar with it, what is at the heart of this lawsuit, how these kids were treated, and why this lawsuit exists in the first place?
Well, basically, there was discrimination towards children in the sense that they didn't have the access to the same programs and services as if you were in the provincial system for child welfare. That's one piece. The other piece was that the system itself was terribly set up, that it was focused on apprehension, that a lot of financial resources would be kicked into the system by taking children away, and there was no monies for prevention. And so that's one piece. The other one that we went to court on was the inadequate definition of Jordan's principle. Like the Crown had a very narrow definition. In fact, it was so narrow that not one case was solved under the Crown's current definition of and applying Jordan's principle. And so there was lots of discrimination in that system. So we went to court to say this is not acceptable, this is not right, and so it needs to be fixed. So that's why we went to court. And we're grateful that it's now been certified and that there is a mediation process in place. But at the end of the day, we say, how do you quantify a missed childhood? How do you quantify a childhood, that's free from abuse, free from discrimination? It's going to be difficult to quantify, so we're going to rely on experts to help get to that number.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask, because sort of what can we expect out of this process now? And ultimately, is the goal to, with the help of those experts, come up with some compensation for those kids who did lose out on so much?
Well, that's ultimately why we went to court, that you can't discriminate against children. And that's terrible, against little children. And so getting to that number, but again, we say it this way, that while the Crown didn't really bear any expense when they were implementing the program in the first place, actual costs were put up front for apprehension of children, with very little costs, in maintaining the children in their communities and their families and loving, caring homes. And, so they missed out on a very happy childhood. And then in a lot of cases, there was a lot of abuse as well. And so, again, quantifying a missed childhood free from abuse, free from discrimination, is going to be a difficult thing to do. So we're going to rely on experts to try to get to that. We're just thankful that mediation is now involved. And it really speeds up the process to get to compensation, because if there was no mediation, it would take a long time through the legal system to try to get results and to try to get resolvement of a very, very fundamental breach of human rights against children.
Is there any anticipated timeline now that this has happened for mediation to carry through to a decision?
Just as soon as possible, Vashi, because again, we have the throne speech coming up on September 23rd. You never know what's going to happen in terms of the politics. But the Liberal government, we lift them up for coming to the table. We just encourage them to put as much resources behind this to get it resolved as soon as possible. But because you never know what's going to happen in the political system. So we want this resolved as soon as possible. So provide as much human resources that we can to get this resolved expeditiously as possible.
Does this have any impact on another decision that we've discussed quite frequently on this show? I've interviewed the Minister of Indigenous Services, Mark Miller, about that. That's the Human Rights Tribunal decision that did award a very specific sum of compensation to the tune of $40,000 for kids who were affected, their family members. The government had sent that to, I think it's judicial review. They've essentially appealed it. And I know that Minister Miller has before on this program talked about the lawsuit and trying to go through that first. There was some criticism for the government on that. Where do things sit there?
That, Vashi, is an entirely separate process under the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal purview. So that process will take its own track and take its own course. And we've got to work with our other parties that were part of that suit as well to come up with options in terms of the applying or getting that $40,000 out to the children that did suffer discrimination and abuse as well in that system. So that's basically a separate process and a separate system unto itself under the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. So we have to work on that file as well. But this one is totally separate.
Is the government sending, from your perspective, any mixed message by deciding to go this route with today's decision, but continuing to fight that decision?
Yeah, again, it's on one hand, we lift up the government for doing what they've done, in terms of the certification of 2 class action lawsuits, and then as well agreeing to mediation on one hand. And but on the other hand, on the CHRT, which took many, many years, which AFN started over 10 years ago, they're looking at a judicial review on that piece. So we're going to keep pushing them because both processes are very legitimate. And ultimately, it's about getting compensation to children that did suffer discrimination and in some cases abuse from a system that was flawed, because we have to fix the system as well. It's not only about compensation, but fixing a child and family services system that's innately flawed right from square one. And that's the bigger piece going forward, because as I said before, there's 40,000 children in foster care right across Canada. And so this even ties in with Bill C-92, where First Nations can start exerting their jurisdiction and their own laws over child welfare as well. So there's another piece that we've got to remember that's at play here as well. But it's all about keeping children at home in healthy, loving, caring homes, and no longer being subjugated to a system that was based on apprehension, because it was fraught with discrimination and abuse. And I think we have an opportunity now to fix it going forward.
Before I let you go, National Chief Bellegarde, on systems that are flawed, and that's putting it mildly. With the residential school system, we've seen a real backlash, obviously, when it comes to the statues of John A. Macdonald. I know that you've commented on what happened over the weekend a little bit earlier. We just played some tape today from Regina, where the former leader of the Conservative Party, Andrew Scheer, held sort of a rally, a virtual rally, an in-person rally to celebrate the, quote, positive contributions of John A. Macdonald. He was met with protesters who were there, immediately. I'm wondering if you've seen that, first of all, but second, what you take away from that.
I would say, Vashi, in Canada, there's a lot of hurt and anger because of colonization and oppression, and you see that rising up right now. And I've said before that there's 2 things that really hurt First Nations people in Canada when you look back over the history of Canada as a nation state. One was the genocide via the residential schools. That really hurt our people in a big way. It killed our people. It killed the individual, killed that pride in the individual, killed their languages, killed the family unit, killed the connection to the community. People did not know how to love or give love, did not know how to parent. So we still feel the intergenerational traumas of the residential schools. There's no question. Then the other one was the imposition of the Indian Act in 1876, which basically colonization and oppression. We couldn't leave the reserve without a pass until 1951. No access to legal counsel till 1951. All these things. So between those 2 things, it's colonization. And you see it bubbling to the top now. And so I think there's an education awareness piece, because yes, John A. Macdonald was the Prime Minister of Canada. And yes, he helped build this country on one hand through the railroad. But it's also tell the whole truth about what happened. Make space not only in addition for all the Prime Minister of Canada, but as well, there's a lot of great First Nations leaders as well. There should be spaces as well made available for our leaders, like Chief Piapot, like Chief Palmmaker, like Chief Big Bear, like Deskahay, the first Mohawk person that went to the League of Nations to fight what Canada was doing here. So we have lots of heroes. I think people got to remember that nobody's going anywhere in this country. So let's roll up our sleeves, embrace reconciliation, and let's build a brighter future together for our children and grandchildren, respecting our different languages and our views and everything that we've added to this country. So that's my thoughts on it right now.
What do you say? What does it say to you that Mr. Scheer held that rally?
I would say that the people don't understand the whole history of Canada, and there's an education awareness component. Because First Nations people have contributed a lot through the land and the resources. And Canada is a beautiful, rich country, no question. And I think the truth has to be told about all the leaders in Canada, not only the good, but the bad as well. And it's a way of educating people. And that's what should happen. It's an education awareness moment. And I think people have to come together and have cooler heads, cooler minds, and say, yeah, this is the history of Canada. It's a colonial country. We were a colony of Great Britain right up until 1982. And so it's like going forward. I would say, let's learn from the past, not live there. How are we going to go forward together collectively so that our children and grandchildren can have a bright future full of the love and respect that we need and embracing our different languages and cultures? Like, we're stronger because of our diversity. We always say that. Well, let's show that and really embrace the diversity together because we have a rich history.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, National Chief Bellegarde. Pleasure to have you with us as always.
Okay, glad for the opportunity.
Perry Bellegarde is the National Chief of the AFN. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.